It all started with a very simple idea. Tell the stories of how successful middle market CEOs made it to the corner office. I'm Brant Handley, founder and managing director of Resource Options International, or ROI. We're the USA's premier executive search firm focused exclusively on empowering middle market companies to attract, hire, and retain A players while transforming top executives' careers and lives. ROI's Into the Corner office is dedicated to discovering how middle market CEOs advance their career, and we're making these remarkable and sometimes quite unbelievable stories available to you for the very first time. Listen and learn about the challenges they've overcome, the interesting people they've met along the way, and the lessons learned that steered these executives' unique journey into a middle market corner office of their own. I know you enjoy these CEO stories as much as I've enjoyed recording them. So thank you for listening today. And if you like what you've heard, rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm looking forward to you joining me on the next great middle market CEO adventure into the corner office. My guest today is Steve Heeley. Steve has overseen many leading brands across the fast casual industry, including Au Bon Pain, Baja Fresh, and Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf over a 20-year career. Prior to joining Veggie Grill as CEO in 2014, Steve was president and CEO of Earl of Sandwich, an international high-volume fast casual sandwich brand. Steve started his professional career at the full-service Mexican restaurant El Torito, where he advanced through the ranks at the company to assume leadership roles. He likes to spend his free time with his children, travel while experiencing veggie food and culture in restaurants around the world, distance cycling, and volunteering with at-risk youth. Steve Heeley, welcome into the corner office.
Thanks. Great to be here. It's my pleasure.
It's great to have you here as well, Steve. And as I mentioned before we started the pod, we spoke a couple of months ago. You've been very busy. I want to hear about that and all the great things that are happening at Veggie Grill. But before we jump into that, tell us a little bit about the early years, where you grew up and what your early family life was like.
Yeah, I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona. I was one of 5 kids, big family. So very, very active life being in a large family like that. Both my parents worked as well. So we were a middle class family, and just had sort of a normal upbringing, for that time.
Were you oldest, youngest, somewhere in the middle?
I'm 4th in the birth order, so I'm next to youngest.
Got it. So probably a combination of brothers and sisters, right? And what did your mom and dad do? Were they working class? Did they have their degrees, work professionally?
Neither one of my folks had a college degree. So my mom was a telephone operator. She did that for a long time, like 30 years, back in the days when there were telephone operators. My dad was in sales.
Yeah. What types of things did he sell?
He actually sold and helped engineer HVAC systems. So, for example, if you're a company and you're doing a new project and you're going to put on all the air conditioning and heating systems, he would work with the engineers on the design of that and then sell them the products they needed to complete those projects.
Yeah, I know a little bit about the industry. One of our clients out on the East Coast is a distributor of HVAC and heating equipment, Sid Harvey. They're about a $200-300 million family-owned business, 3rd, 4th generation now, I think. And it's a very interesting industry. One of those evergreens, right? They're always going to be around.
Yeah, my dad didn't have a college education, wasn't a classically trained engineer, but he actually was pretty brilliant on the design side and actually did things that typically an engineer would do. And he was involved in, helping to patent a couple of things, and very, very self-trained, very mechanically oriented. My dad was the type that he could do anything mechanically, whether it was wire a house, fix a car, do plumbing. I mean, he just, it was really natural to him. So learned a lot about handyman stuff from my dad, for sure.
And what about, brothers and sisters?
Sure. I have 2 older brothers, an older sister, and a younger brother. My oldest brother was a firefighter in Phoenix for 40 years. He just recently retired. Oh, wow. My sister is a nurse and has been a nurse for her whole career. My next brother, 2 years older than me, was a aerospace engineer. designed jet engines and worked on a few different types of aeronautical engineering, satellites, and that kind of thing. And then my younger brother, who's 6 years younger, works for one of the big railroads. He's a railroad engineer, so he drives locomotives and goes all over the country doing that.
Yeah, cool. Looks like a couple of the brothers took after Dad, right, with their mechanical inclination.
Certainly my younger brother, yeah. My oldest brother, his dream was always to be a firefighter, and he did that and lived his career and had a great career doing that.
Awesome. What kind of, inspirational messages did you get from mom and dad, or maybe some of those older brothers or sisters growing up? Were there lessons learned in those early years that you've taken with you along the way?
Oh, sure. My folks were from a different generation. My dad grew up in the Depression. He lost his father when he was 12 years old. And fought in World War II. So it was a generation where it was really impressed upon us kids that if you want anything in life, it doesn't come to you. You have to work for it. You have to work hard. You have to be ambitious and really go out and get what you want. And so that work ethic and from that generation. And both my parents, neither one had a college education. They didn't come from any type of affluent background. So it was really impressed upon us early on that, if you want things in life, you got to, decide what you want and go get it, work hard. And, nothing comes to you for free or for easy, right? That was sort of the message.
That's right. Were you encouraged to be a good student in school?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I think, I personally early on made a commitment. I realized that, I saw how hard my parents worked, and, the disadvantages or hurdles that they had not having a college education. So that was one of the things I committed to myself early on, that I was always going to pursue higher education. And I realized that was important. And, I enjoyed school. I wasn't a straight A student by any means, but I was a good student. I generally worked pretty hard to get good grades.
Awesome. What about outside of class? Are you involved in sports, music, theater, anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I was involved in athletics quite a bit, and that was something throughout grade school, high school, college. I was involved in a lot of different athletics. From tennis to like a lot of kids played Little League and flag football and Pop Warner. When I got into high school, I was a pretty serious athlete. My two sports were football and wrestling. My primary sport was football. So that was something that was a big part of my early years was athletics. And in fact, I played football all through high school and then into college.
Oh, into college as well. Cool. What about entrepreneurial things? You've certainly had a entrepreneurial career. Were there things that you did younger in the early days? Have ubiquitous paper route or involved in money raising schemes as you grew up?
My folks were not. They encouraged us early on to pursue our own path in terms of earning money. We didn't get big allowances and that kind of thing. So I started exploring working early on, and I had a paper route. I actually cut lawns. I think starting when I was like 10 or 11 years old, I'd go around the neighborhood with my lawnmower and cut lawns for $5 or $10. Did a paper route, and my first restaurant job was when I was 14 years old. My first job was as a dishwasher. In a little Mexican restaurant in Phoenix. My sister was a waitress there. My brother was a cook. And so my
business in that regard, huh?
Yeah, my entree into the restaurant business was one night my brother gave me a call. I was at home and he said, "You need to get in here right away." And I go, "Well, what are you talking about?" And he said, "Our dishwasher quit and you've got a job washing dishes." And so I was like, "Okay, I'm there."
Show up. Yeah.
I worked in restaurants all through high school and through college. I mean, I did some other things to earn money in summers and that kind of thing. But, that was the beginning of my restaurant career.
That's awesome. And were you socking the money away for college, or were there special things that you treated yourself with over the years with that extra bread?
Sure, both. I mean, the big thing for me is I wanted to have my own car. So that was my goal early on, was to save money for a car. So that was, kind of, my initial dream was have some spending money and be able to buy sneakers and, whatever things that I wanted to buy. But I was really focused on buying my first car.
What car did you decide on in the end?
Well, I really wanted a Camaro. I wanted a Camaro, but ended up getting a little mini pickup. That was a big deal for me to get my first car. That was sort of my first goal in the working world, to save for a car.
That's awesome. That's awesome. How did you make your decision about college? And you went to Madison, I think, right? And what made you decide to go there?
Yeah, actually, I had a little bit of a circuit route in college. So, coming out of high school, I wanted to play football, athletics, and so I was recruited by some small schools, but I really wanted to play in a bigger school, and I wasn't good enough out of high school to play in a big 4-year sort of Division A school. So I went
D1.
I actually went to junior college for 2 years and played football in junior college at Scottsdale Community College, which had a great program. We were actually the national champions my sophomore year, which was great. So went there on athletic scholarship.
Awesome.
And then after I finished junior college, I went to the University of Arizona ostensibly to play football there. Had a knee injury in the off season, and that sort of ended my football career.
Got it.
But and then went to University of Arizona, came really close to getting my degree, and I was working for a company called El Torito at the time, and I was offered the opportunity to get into their management program. So I had a decision to make. Do I continue and finish my degree, or do I get into restaurant management? And I decided to pursue the management path, which at the end of the day was a great decision. And then I went back later to finish my degree from Madison University. I got my bachelor's and my master's from Madison.
Awesome. So did you go into the management program with El Torito? I remember them, by the way. We had a El Torito down in Ventura, just down the road from me in Santa Barbara, way back when.
They were a really hot concept. They sort of were the biggest.
They were a Mexican restaurant.
Casual themed Mexican restaurant. They were growing. It was an exciting time. I started working for them part-time in college, and was a waiter and a bartender, and ended up becoming sort of they didn't call it a shift manager. It was like a head waiter. You helped make the schedules for the waiters and that kind of thing. And the guy who was my general manager saw some talent in me and really encouraged me to look at getting into the management program. And he was a good mentor. Awesome. And so I ended up becoming a restaurant manager with them, or assistant manager, they called it. Did that for about a year, became a general manager. I think I was 22 years old, and I got promoted to general manager of this big high volume casual theme restaurant. And then I spent 10 years at El Torito. So I kind of worked my way up. I was a general manager for about a year, then became a district manager and a regional manager, and then like a regional VP of operations. So got a great education there. At the time, there were a lot of super talented people working in the company. I had some really strong mentors, made some great relationships, had the opportunity to open a lot of restaurants, go to new markets, go to markets that needed to be fixed and turned around. I moved around quite a bit during that time. And sort of got a reputation as somebody, if they needed to have somebody come in and get a market going in the right direction, then
a fixer. You were a fast casual fixer, it sounds like.
Yeah, that was so I had a great run with them and learned a lot in that experience, and had some really good
great
mentors.
Company. So that's obviously where you first started managing people, right? Was it El Torito?
Yeah, that's where I first started managing people.
What do you remember from some of the challenges that first management job?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest challenges, at least at that time in the restaurant business, there wasn't a lot of focus on leadership development skills for somebody that was new to let's say a general manager position, or particularly when I became a multi-unit manager. And, so there wasn't a lot of intentional development. So, I sort of took it upon myself to be a student and try to align myself with folks that I felt could mentor me and establish those relationships so I could get the benefit of, learning from others that were successful and that I admired and that were willing to invest time in me. And then I sort of modeled myself after some of those early mentors and was fortunate to have some really good early mentors.
What were some of those lessons? I just to double click on that a little bit. Some of the, early leadership lessons you had from former bosses and mentors.
Sure. I think, establishing trust and credibility, number one. I think in managing others, it's really important that you have high integrity, that people can trust what you say and that you're willing to be a person of your word. I mean, at a fundamental level, I think I learned early on that relationships are important. And if you're going to get the best out of your people and, really have a great team, you really have to establish those personal relationships. And, I think one of the real learnings for me early on was, you can't manage everybody the same.
That's right.
Yeah. And, you make some mistakes along the way. And so that was one of my early mistakes, was thinking, okay, I'll just manage everybody the same, or I've got my style and everybody can adjust to my style.
You got to get used to me. Right.
And it doesn't quite work that way. You have to be more of a situational manager and look to manage each person individually. And, I think everyone earlier in their career, I'm no exception, you make a lot of mistakes. And so, being willing to learn from those mistakes. And, I think like a lot of people, I'm often my worst own critic.
Sure.
Which, I early on, I said, okay, well, I'm going to learn from my mistakes and use it as a way of improving my performance. And, I think that's sort of stuck with me, throughout my career.
Awesome. We've all had bosses in the past that perhaps weren't the best examples, but sometimes some of those are the best examples in what not to do, right? And how to manage others. So without mentioning any names, do you remember other experiences you've had perhaps with bosses that you just said, oh gosh, I can't wait to move on from this guy, or girl, but you met and learned some things that were really important in terms of kind of things that, you shouldn't be doing as a manager.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, I think if you can remain unemotional and objective, you can learn as much from what not to do as what to do. And I think that, and it depends on sort of the role that you're in. I mean, earlier on in my career, I think that, I had a very strong work ethic. And so I wouldn't, it's sort of a fundamental management principle, but I wouldn't ask my team to do anything that I wasn't willing to do, or at least that I wasn't willing to show them that I had the same level of commitment that I was asking from them, and sort of lead from the front. And, I've worked for some folks that adhere to that principle, and then other folks that would direct that, but wouldn't be willing to invest the time themselves. And I think having a high level of engagement and commitment in what you're doing and commitment to your team, you get that back. And so, I've worked with some folks that, sort of manage from a distance, and I was always, kind of self-motivated. So that didn't really bother me. But, I think to be effective, you have to have that level of engagement with your team.
That's right. That's right.
I
think probably in the service industry, hospitality in general, but certainly in the restaurant field, that the do as I, say, not as I do principle just doesn't work. Right. You've got a lot of hourly employees, folks who, probably see things pretty much black and white. They're not politicians. They're there to earn a good wage. And, they like people who roll up their sleeves.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. And I think, the other thing that I